Welcome back to the final and what I think will be the most interesting NRL season preview, where we are going to be looking at the top four of last year's NRL premiership and predicting where they're going to finish in 2026. We're going to be talking about the Brisbane Broncos. Will they go back to back? The Canterbury Bulldogs. Will they improve? Will they regress? Who knows? The Melbourne Storm, who I think there are lots of question marks over. And finally, the Canberra Raiders, who finished minor premiers but then went out in back-to-back sets. Leaguie, without any further ado, let's start with the Canberra Raiders. Minor premiers, really young, exciting, strong side, but it all just fizzled out at the back end of the year.
Yeah, it was definitely a disappointing back end of the season for Canberra. I mean, for those who don't know, I live in Canberra. I know a lot of Raiders supporters, and there was a fair bit of concern coming into the final series that, you know, in terms of big game experience, a lot of their players were lacking it, but they definitely didn't think they'd be going out in straight sets. And, you know, you look at a game like that one that they had against the Broncos, one of the all-time great games of rugby league I have ever seen. Such fine margins. If they'd been able to win that, they did win the game twice. If they'd been able to win that, we could be talking about a very different, Canberra Raiders side going into this season. But history was written the way it was. Coming into this year, all the talk is about that 7 jersey. You know, Ethan Sanders, I think, is the guy who is not quite locked in, but a lot of people think he will be in that role. He's certainly been slated for it in recent seasons, but then you've got the likes of Kobe Black as well, who are now in the side. I think almost any analysis of the Raiders does have to start there. I think that with their forward pack, you know what you're going to get, and it's going to be very, very high quality. They've got solid backs, but it's just that halfback jersey that concerns me.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid concern. But let's look at the rest of the team. Still got lots of experience. Obviously, Josh Papali has decided to play on another season after we thought he'd retire. Really exciting outside backs. You've got the likes of Ethan Strange, who really took off last year. Hudson Young, I think, holds the key though. Who do you think is your key player for the Canberra Raiders to have any sort of success in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously that, as I mentioned, that 7 jersey, I think is by far the key position for them. Can there be someone who can step into the shoes of Jamal Fogarty? But aside from that, look, they've got the weapons, and that's the key thing. I mean, you just need a half that is confident enough to guide the likes of Hudson Young, Joe Tarpany around the field. These are experienced guys. If there's a half who can play confidently, complement Ethan Strange, you look at the back row, Hudson Young, Zach Hosking, Matty Nicholson, I rate so highly. We've got through the middle, Papali'i, Tarpany, Horsburgh, Hawkins Smithies. These are really good players, and these are Raiders players who have played in Raiders systems and come up through Raiders systems, and who will do anything for Ricky Stewart. I think the Raiders are a side who would be an absolute joy to support because they constantly punch above their weight. They work as hard as any team out there, and I see no reason why that will slow down next season. It's just whether they'll regress a little bit too much with that 7 jersey.
So with that, predictive finish for the Raiders, a difficult one this.
It is. I said with an earlier team that my prediction on their regression is less so to do with them and more so to do with the sides who finish below them, who I think will improve. And when you have literally won the minor premiership, there is kind of only one direction you can go. I don't think they'll have as good a season. I think they're sort of taking a step back to take 2 steps forward in terms of just this really young spine that they're putting together. I think that at their best they can still make top 4, but I don't think it will be top 2. I think maybe 4th could be around where they'll be aiming for. There is a world though where they miss the finals, and that does concern me a little bit. I think it would take a fair bit to go wrong, but we do see most NRL seasons there'll be a side who shoot up out of absolutely nowhere, and then everyone's pretty high on them, and the next season they regress quite a bit. We saw it with the Cowboys a couple seasons ago particularly. They could be that side, and we really won't know until about a third of the way through the season whether that's the way that the Raiders are heading. So it's so hard to say, but I think they'll be aiming for the finals, and if they do miss it, any team that wins the minor premiership and misses the finals the season after that is a disappointment.
Yeah, it is. But I think you make a really strong point around number 7 is just such a crucial position, and so you can have all the strike in the world. I describe a halfback position as a car without an engine. If you don't have a strong 7 or at least a strong 6, Ethan Strange, as brilliant as he is an X-factor player, not an organizer. He's going to be relying on someone to unlock his capabilities, his potential, his skills. So in many ways, the key player is whoever plays 7. So we don't know who that'll be as yet. Could be Sanders, could be someone else. And I think you're right. I think they're going to spend the year figuring out who's number 7, and that's going to set them up for 2027 and beyond. So for that reason, I tend to agree. I think they're going to come out of the top 4, personally. I think they could fish anywhere from 5th to 11th, because Canberra, again, are just sadly one of those sides who, again, like the Warriors in many respects, can be brilliant on their day, but can just be so inconsistent. And because of those big question marks now around the halfback, I think it really could be a mixed bag.
Yeah, but for Raiders fans, I mean, I've spoken about this in the past, their plan is this young spine. You've got Kyle Weeks at the back, you've got...
Weeks is brilliant.
He's so good. Ethan Strange, I think, is already one of the best 5'8" in the comp. Probably either Sanders or Kobe Black in at 7, Owen Paddy in at hooker. That is, like, they've truly locked up some of the best young spine talent in the world of rugby league. But those guys are a solid 5 years of being at their best. So it's a Raiders side who, you know, their window is opening. I very much don't think it's closing, but maybe this season isn't the one in which they really push for a premiership.
Yeah, you might want to move your finger out of the premiership window, Raiders fans, because it might just get jammed in 2026. Let's talk about the Melbourne Storm. A side that, again, found themselves in an NRL Grand Final, and have almost had a bit of a repeated theme over the last 2 years of getting to the big dance, but end up being very much the bridesmaid rather than the bride. I don't know what to make of Melbourne. I think they're just one of those sides where we spoke about the Cronulla Sharks earlier, Mr. Consistent. Mr. Consistent was defined by Craig Bellamy and the Melbourne Storm. I don't view them as a stronger side this year. I view them as very much a weaker side. I think obviously the big one is Pappenhausen leaves. Logo we expect will be the fullback, but will the Melbourne Storm rise to the occasion, or do we expect them to more or less stay the same or even regress?
Well, I think given that they are so consistent and so often at the very top of the NRL, there's a lot of fans who are keen to write them off a little bit coming into this season. I'm personally not comfortable predicting them outside the top 4. I think there's absolutely an argument that the loss of Ryan Pappenhausen in at fullback is a loss of quality. It is. But I don't think that the downgrade from him to Fa'alongo is as big as a lot of people are suggesting. I rate Fa'alongo so highly. I mean, we've seen him do it. There's a game he played against the Kangaroos for Samoa. I think it was back into 2024, and he was so good. He looked right up to it. The other major one is obviously Eli Katoa. He's a back rower that you really can't replace, and particularly given that they've tried to replace from within. You've got the likes of Atavalu Visati and Joe Chan, who are okay, and they may, you know, step up and surprise some people, but still not that level of quality. It's funny with the Melbourne Storm. This is a stat that I sort of discovered this morning, and I almost had to double check because it doesn't feel real, but only 2 players in their entire side are premiership winners. That's Jerome Hughes and Cameron Munster. Now that Pappenhausen's gone, you sort of just assume the likes of Xavier Coates and Harry Grant, with all their experience, were in that premiership winning side, but they weren't. So, it's one where you've got that lack of premiership winning experience, and then a bit of a hoodoo, as you say, of getting to the big dance and then missing out at the very end. Psychology, you're someone who's very big on it. Could that have its impact?
Yeah, I think so. Interestingly about the Melbourne Storm, if I'm not mistaken, they're in the top 4 sides for offloads as well in 2025, which is not something you would think of a Melbourne Storm side in the past. So I have to give Craig Bellamy his flowers. I think that shows his adaptability as a coach to kind of play to the strengths that the team does have. Psychology, look, they're drilled. They're always going to be one of, if not the fittest NRL sides, and for that reason, like yourself, I can't predict them outside of the top 4. The fire in the belly for the big dance, I would hope is there, because a lot of those players have not experienced it. I have got a taste of getting to the grand final, so you kind of hope that might be able to lead them in. But man, they're an easy team to hate, the Melbourne Storm. So I won't be rooting for them personally, but you can't write them off. I think Melbourne Storm, anywhere between 1st and 4th.
Yeah, I go exactly that. Minor premiership, absolutely the ceiling for them, and if they finish outside the top 4, I'd be surprised. I think we're definitely in for a big season from Tua Fa'alongo. I'm super excited about him, and we could see some young forwards, as I mentioned, like some Masati stepping up in the absence of some of their injured guys.
Well, I'm super excited to talk about the next team, and that's the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. Obviously, the team that I support, I hold dear to my heart. So before I give my thoughts, where are the Bulldogs' strengths from an outsider?
Well, I will very much let you lead on this one. I feel I had my say about the Roosters, but look, Doggies coming into this season, I mean, it's interesting. I feel that, I've said this with a couple of teams, they seem to have taken a step back to take 2 steps forward with the whole changing of the halves of the situation. I think the transition from rebound is a down, but it might not necessarily be one that hurts results too much. It's whether you get this half situation of Burton, Galvin, Mitch Woods. What's the balance there? Is Galvin a 7? Is he not a 7? Other than that, I think in terms of their strengths, look, they've recruited brilliantly with Leo Thompson now in the forward pack. I think you've now got your alpha. That's going to free up guys like Josh Curran, like Jacob Preston to play a bit more of their natural game, not have to take on as much of the grunt. Going forward, to Vanilla is a guy I rate really, really highly from his Roosters days, should be able to excel there. And then the outside backs, you know, the centre pairing of Crichton and Cherry, that's as good as you could ask for. Kiraz on the wing is super underrated, could play Origin in my opinion. So
led the NRL in offloads.
There
Jacob
you go.
Kiraz,
there you go.
from the
so
wing. 60 offloads.
That's brilliant from him. So yeah, I mean, I rate them highly. I have them in and around that 8, but I will let you do the talking on this.
Yeah, it's difficult. I did a video on the Bulldogs, and I think that it shows in my analysis what a brilliant coach Cameron Ciraldo is. So for anyone who doesn't know, last year the Bulldogs led the NRL in penalties, but they were in the top 4 for completed sets, so they finished with 79%. The highest was 81%. They also had the largest share of possession of any NRL side. So where they really struggled last year was they conceded a lot of meters. As I mentioned earlier, they conceded a lot of penalties. And what that told me was Cameron Ciraldo had a small forward pack because he wanted to build a culture at the Bulldogs first before looking to bring in big name players. Because I think we saw the Bulldogs in the past, they signed Thompson from England in the past. They've gone for a big sexy name here and there, and it just quite hasn't worked. Whereas when Ciraldo came in, he said, I'm going to get hard workers and I'm going to build this team on hard work. We're going to start with defense. I'm going to build an attitude and a culture of success that way. And then once that culture is embedded, then I'll start bringing in X Factor. So now is the right time to bring in the likes of a Leo Thompson, who, to your point, I think adds a lot of grunt to the forward pack, adds a lot of much needed size to the forward pack. And then I wonder, so the risk with the Bulldogs is they have been able to play such a high intensity defensive system because they had a smaller mobile pack. They don't concede a lot of points. They led the NRL for points conceded last year. So they want to make sure that they get the balance right between adding the size of Leo Thompson. They've also got a few young forwards coming through. Jack Todd got a taste of NRL last season, broke his arm unfortunately, and injuries have been the story of his young NRL career. He's off contract this year, but I think will be in and around the NRL top 17 and does again add much needed size. There's also the likes of Jack Hunter, another young exciting NRL forward who I think could add some much needed size to the Bulldogs. The question marks are all around the halves. To your point, I think Hayward is a downgrade. To answer your question, is Lachlan Galvin a 7 or not? He's not a 7. I don't think Matt Burton is a 7 either. And Connor Tracy led the Bulldogs in try assists last year with 12, equal to Stephen Crichton. I don't know where. I think the spine's going to change throughout the year. I think there's a lot of question marks around when does Mitchell Woods come in. Mitchell Woods has now had a minor setback in terms of his pre-season. I think the Bulldogs are going to struggle with creativity. I think they're going to, like the Cronulla Sharks, they're a system team, they defend well, and because they don't concede a lot of points, they're always going to be in and around there. So for a top 4 finish, because if you don't concede points, you don't have to score a lot of points. But then the question begs, you can't win an NRL premiership if you can't score points. Where the Bulldogs struggle statistically, in points scored, they're the only team that finished in the top 4, who were in the top 4 for line breaks, but went in the top 4 for points scored of the NRL sides from last year. So that tells you there is an issue with scoring points. I think Galvin will improve because he's a young player. Matt Burton had 4 try assists last year. I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that's good enough for any NRL half, let alone an NRL halves pairing trying to push on. And I don't want to knock Matt Burton. I think outside of the brilliant accomplished number 7, he could thrive as a 6. But between Galvin and Burton, it just doesn't work. And as we just touched on around, you need the engine to function. I think the engine at the Bulldogs is broken. I think we're going to see Crichton at fullback at some point. I think we're going to see Mitchell Woods at some point. And I think it's just going to depend on what point in the season do these things happen, and does it happen at a early enough time that the Bulldogs can get their cohesion right to push for a premiership window. I've been talking for far too long. I think the Bulldogs will finish anywhere between 3rd and 8th. In fact, I think this is a year where the Bulldogs might just regress a little bit.
just to confirm something you said, so you mentioned Crichton flag seeing injury. Would that be Crichton at 1, Burton in the centres, and then Woods in at number 7?
I personally would have moved Burton to the centres. I think that the Panthers actually exposed him at left centre. I think it's been far too long since he's played in that position, and I think defensively you kind of saw the undoing of him last year. I don't think he's got necessarily the defensive readiness, even though he did it back in 2022. It was a long time ago. I think asking him to do that now is hard. Bronson Xerri is also a brilliant left centre. I think by moving him to the right, you're kind of hurting Bronson Xerri. So I personally wouldn't do that. I've seen some Bulldogs fans suggest moving Burton at lock. Again, I don't think he's got the body mould for it. I don't think he's got the defensive. He's not a strong defender. I think he's a big body, but he's not going to push forwards backward. He'll make his tackles. So I think that could be a weak point. I don't know. You can't drop him, but I think he's just going to kind of fumble along at 6. And I think, I could see him getting moved to the centres. But that's the thing. I think we're going to move Burton to left centre. We might move Xerri to right centre, but then your centre pairing you just took out a whole bunch of strikes. So I think the balance is just going to be a little bit undone for the Dogs.
So it's a very tricky one. Some players we've seen throughout history, their versatility's hurt them a little bit, and Bass back home is one of those guys. To get to a ladder prediction, I mean, I do think they will regress. I'm not sure about top 4 purely because I look at Brisbane, I think Melbourne, Penrith, Roosters. I think will the Dogs finish ahead of those sides? Unlikely, very much possible, but unlikely. They could sneak into 4th. I think failing to make the finals would be a bit of a disappointment from them, but there's just so many question marks around it. Look, there's a world in which these questions continue to go unanswered and it goes just terribly wrong, but I think that's very unlikely. I think they will finish probably in the lower half of that top 8.
I tend to disagree. And that's a perfect transition, not really, into the Brisbane Broncos. The lazy prediction is, of course, they go back to back. And I've already seen it from the likes of Brave and Asta because there's nothing else to watch on TV. So I've been watching some NRL Fox podcasts and others, to be fair. And I think it's just a lazy assessment that people can get stuck into. It's easy to go with the people or the team that won the premiership in the previous season. But can the Broncos, obviously they can go back to back, but will they?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on there with the sort of lazy assessment. It sort of happens year on year, and a lot of people forget that almost midway through last season, they were sitting at 11th, the Brisbane Broncos. So it's not like they've had this, really dominant season. They snuck into the top 4 sort of late in the season. It was them or Cronulla, and then had one of the brilliant finals runs that we've seen. And that's enough to win you a premiership. And in the record books, that's what it's going to show. It was one of the great sort of finals runs that I can remember. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a side who we can expect to go into next season and just dominate week in, week out. They still, to me, haven't found that consistency that you would want when you're picking someone to finish in the top 2. They definitely are capable of winning another premiership again. I mean, the concern is the age of the likes of Ben Hunt and Adam Reynolds, but given that they literally just won a premiership, I have no reason to think that they're going to massively regress in that way. For me, the big question mark is Reece Walsh, which is, it's interesting to say, 2025 was so much the year of Walsh, but throughout much of the regular season, he was quite inconsistent. There were certain games where he was very, very much rocks and diamonds. His performance towards the back end of the season was unreal. If he can continue that and do it week in, week out, Brisbane can absolutely make the top 4 and probably the top 2. But he has yet to do that. I think, to me, that's still something that he has to prove, which is amazing to say for someone who's achieved as much as Reece Walsh already has. I think, they're a side who rightly should be predicted in the top 4, but I wouldn't have them as premiership favourites as a lot of people do.
I tend to agree with you. And I agree around the questions of Reece Walsh. I think Ezra Mann will come back into the halves, personally, and I think Ben Hunt offers diversity in playing him off the interchange bench. It'll just depend. I think they've got the option to use Hunt or Mam or even change them around depending on the team and the game. If you want a higher intensity, I think Ezra Mam is good to start with. If you're looking for more control, I think Ben Hunt is a good option. But good headaches to have if you're Michael Maguire. I agree with you about Reece Walsh. He's 23 years of age. I think people forget that. And I just think he hit a purple patch that is very hard to replicate over an NRL season. That's not to take away from him. That's not to say he can't do it. But I just think, given his age, we saw the best of Billy Slater in the second half of his 20s. And I think that experience still means something. And I think it's very unlikely to see that level of performance from Reece Walsh in any game, let alone 3 games that he managed to deliver upon in last year's final series. So I think Reece Walsh holds the key, as he should. I think he will still have a brilliant year. I still think they have a brilliant team. But they're very much a Rocks and Diamonds side. They are. I mean, their Rocks and Diamonds isn't as extreme as the likes of the New Zealand Warriors or the Canberra Raiders that we were talking about earlier. But I think that they're guaranteed for a top 8. But I could say anywhere from 1st to 8th. Because as you correctly highlighted, they're 11th halfway through last year. So a very talented side, but I don't think there's a formula to their success. I think last year was a lot of on the back of Reece Walsh's brilliance. And when you're relying on individual brilliance to win you a premiership, you can't guarantee that consistency.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a huge window, 1st to 8th, but they are, unbelievably, when we're talking about the premiers, they are a little bit of a swing side. You know, they're a side who'll be hit hard during that mid-period of the season through Origin. Yeah. I think Walsh will absolutely be Queensland fullback. Haas, obviously, Carrigan, Stags even potentially could be off playing Origin. There's also, to me, a little bit of a question about their sort of wing position. We saw Karapani in the grand final, but Grant Atkinson wants to play in that role. We've got Dean Mariner on the other side. To me, I think that's a bit of a weakness relative to other teams. I think we see so much importance of yardage from your outside backs. Yeah. The likes of Mariner don't deliver at that level. And it's not really compensated for with the fullback either, who's another small body. So they have to play a style of footy that is very forward dominant. And, you know, look, it wasn't that long ago where we saw teams struggle to climb the mountain twice in a row. When the Roosters did it, I think they were the first side of the, first side in the NRL era to go back to back. They've become a bit desensitized with that Panthers run, just assuming that teams can do it. But it's a huge psychological and emotional thing to climb that mountain twice. They've gone from very much the hunters to the hunted. It's a whole different ballgame when that happens. So if they do finish 8th, it'll be a disappointment, but it might not be entirely a surprise.
There you go. Broncos are the hunted. Everyone's coming for that horse meat. But yeah, so do you agree with the 1 to 8?
I do. And look, I'm not tipping them maybe in either of those positions. I think maybe sort of the midpoint of that is around where I'd have them. First being a massive success and 8th being a little bit of a disappointment certainly for them, but they shouldn't miss the finals.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. And there you have it. There is our NRL season preview. Hope you have enjoyed it. Make sure you hit a like on the video. It does mean that more people get to criticize League in the comments and compliment me, of course. And subscribe to both of our channels if you are new. But NRL season, not too far away. Go the Dogs.
See you guys.